Okay, so as we're building this portfolio, something that I want to bring your attention to, and this has been getting a lot of news and a lot of academic papers, is this concept of active share. So when I was in the industry, we used to have what was called closet indexers. So active managers that really just bought the index and they charged a lot of money for that. You know, these people were phased out because the bottom line, if you're going to build your portfolio to hold all the S&P 500 stocks, why should we hire you? Vanguard can do that for 4 basis points when you're 120. So this idea of active share, which I think is really important, what we want to know is your portfolio, how different is it compared to the benchmark? So basically this formula, one of the few formulas in equities, you know, this is one that I would want to know. But more importantly, not so much the calculation, I want you to understand the thought process. I'm looking for portfolios that are different than the benchmark. If the portfolio is exactly like the benchmark, why am I buying an active fund to do that when I can get it cheaper from a passive fund? So again, active share ranges from 0 to 1. I want to find portfolios that are closer to 1. I want active portfolio management. I do not want closet benchmarkers. So that's really the thought process that I want you to think of, and we'll really cover this later when we get into what does the client want. If the client wants to match the index exposure or certain factor exposure, then we're going to want lower active share. But if they want active management, we need to make sure they're getting it. Okay, so let's talk about again, if we do active management, there's a risk. First of all, we could be wrong. So this tracking error is always going to be something that we have to deal with. How much tracking error is acceptable for the client's portfolio? So here's the thing. Active returns, our returns as an active manager are going to be more volatile compared to some benchmark. It's because we're making bets. We're going overweight, underweight the portfolio. So this idea of active risk, it's going to depend on a few things. First of all, what actually happened, and then we're going to look at historical returns. So the next thing that we're going to think about, we've got to think about, okay, well, there was this much active risk over the last 5 years. Well, what about for the next 3 years going forward? Will these relationships stay the same or will they change? And how much will these relationships change or stay the same? And I want you to think about this concept of active risk. There's 2 things that you have to think about. First of all, this systematic exposure to whatever factor you've identified as a driver. That's going to be that systematic portion. But then there's this idiosyncratic risk that you're going to face from having a concentrated portfolio. If my portfolio analysis tells me I need to be overweight the banking sector, well, guess what? If all of a sudden there's new regulation or something happens in the banking sector, then unfortunately you've got a concentrated exposure to that. You are going to get hit, your stock performance is going to suffer, and you're going to end up with a lot higher tracking error compared to whatever benchmark that you were looking at. So again, how can we focus in on building this portfolio? We need some approaches. Now the CFA, just again, as you've noticed in equity, it's just list after list after list after soft topic after soft topic. Do the best you can to go through this. I highly recommend watch this video a couple times. Go to the in-person classes, but keep up with the reading. And I think on the equities, the Kaplan reading is going to be great. There are going to be some sections I'm going to tell you, go back to the CFA Institute and really dig into the readings. Here, I think equities, because it's not heavily tested and there's so many points to focus on, I think I'd really focus my attention more on the Kaplan material here. And just again, you're not going to score 100% on the exam. You don't need to score 100% to get your charter, but you need to understand some of these key terms. So look, here's just another list. If I'm going to have pure indexing, I better have 0 active share. I better not have, remember it goes from 0 to 1. If you're telling me we're indexing, why do I have 100% different stocks that are in the portfolio? And then in fact, if you have 100% different stocks in the portfolio, then why are you using that benchmark? And we want 0 active risk. And then we can play around with this. We could have factor neutral. I want low active share, low active risk. We could have concentrated factor bets. We could focus on stock picking. We could eliminate basically that systematic factor, and we could pick and rely just on our stock picking. So again, a lot of approaches here. You don't need to memorize all this, but understand the concepts. How are you going to build your portfolio? And I would go into the exam with a couple of ideas of how are you going to build your portfolio.